been watching my videos for a long time, then you should know that my all-time favorite video game series is Metal Gear Solid. I grew up with this series. Metal Gear Solid 1 was my first M-rated game, and I'm not lying when I say that these games have taught me so much about life. It taught me so much about morality and politics, and these games really influenced me in such a way that I can't even begin to wrap my head around how different I would be if I didn't have them. And that extends too to the online modes of this game. With the release of Metal Gear Solid 4, which was a masterpiece in its own right, Kojima Productions and Konami released Metal Gear Online 2. Now, I never played the first one, which came out with Metal Gear Solid 3, but Metal Gear Online 2 was the game that got me into online gaming. With Metal Gear Solid 5, I was expecting the same great Metal Gear experience that I've always gotten from Hideo Kojima. That was a given. But I was also expecting a rebooted and updated Metal Gear Online experience that would be something I could go back to time and again and have so much fun with.
Out of all the spectacular games on my list this year, Metal Gear 5 is the only one that feels like a true next-gen experience. Steam says I've already put 150 hours into this game, and I have a strong feeling that when the online launches for the PC version later this month, I'm gonna put in a whole lot more.
It's hard to score it a full 10, but I'm sure when the Metal Gear Online portion comes out, most of these things will be taken care of, and by that time, the game will easily hit a 10 out of 10.
But after the release of Metal Gear Solid 5, which had its own development issues, the game itself is actually unfinished. Metal Gear Online 3 released, and it was just a huge, bitter disappointment. The game released hobbled with microtransactions and with so little content and care that it seemed like it was just hollow. It was a shell of what Metal Gear Online 2 promised. The thing I realized when playing Metal Gear Online 3 is that there's no joy in it for me. When I play almost any other online game, Titanfall 2, Rocket League, hell, even when I play some Call of Duty games, there's so much joy in just the act of playing itself. Sure, there's fun in unlocking stuff and leveling up my character. Hula Girl, uncommon antenna. That is cultural appropriation, my friend. So I'll equip it and get yelled at by a lift passenger. But the actual reason for me playing is to get into a match and have fun in that match. Just back up. Aha, you dumbass! Get out of here! Woo! Woo, baby! Woo! You fucking dumbass bitch! Okay, later, look at this. Right through the, you see that crossover? Boom! Right past the defense. Go! Is he the best player we have seen in a decade? The critics are saying it. I'm not saying it. But I don't get that same feeling with Metal Gear Online 3. There's something so hollow and soulless about it. Whenever I play it, I feel like ultimately it's meaningless and I'm not really getting any sort of fulfillment out of it. And when you think about an online game, it's always meaningless, right? Unless you're a pro MLG player who's getting money and scholarships and all kinds of ridiculous stuff to play an online game, then there's no real fruit to it. The whole reason for playing is for the sake of playing. But with Metal Gear Online 3, I constantly have this sort of existential crisis about playing this game. It's like, I feel like I'm actually getting sucked into a sink where I'm doing nothing, absolutely nothing with my time. The game feels empty, it feels soulless, it feels vapid, it feels like there's nothing really there. It's like putting fur on a stuffed animal and trying to call it a pet. But with this video, I wanted to explore why exactly I get this feeling from Metal Gear Online. So this video's probably going to be a long one. I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground, talking about the maps in the game, talking about the content, the microtransactions, the DLC, and all these various aspects of it that I think contribute to it being, honestly, not worth anyone's time. It ends up being a project that was capped at the knee, something that wasn't given the tools that it needed to stand on its own. And yet, Konami, in its unending greed, still kept trying to milk all sorts of money out of it, and it ended up making the project even worse somehow. So, there's nowhere left to begin than at the beginning and talk about the history of Metal Gear Online 3 as far as I know it. All this sort of begins with Metal Gear Online 2, right? When Metal Gear Solid 4 was released, Metal Gear Online 2 was released alongside it, and it was this online mode that had unprecedented customizability and was supported very heavily throughout its life cycle. The game got 3 expansion packs filled with tons of new content, and it kept getting regularly scheduled updates which added more and more content to the experience. The game was hobbled by all sorts of bullshit, obviously, from the peer-to-peer connection, the fact that you have to download these massive updates through a peer-to-peer system, which means that if no one else was online, it would take forever to update your game. The fact that you needed 2 login usernames and passwords just to get into the damn game. There were so many barriers to entry, not to mention the unusual controls for an action game like Metal Gear Online that were borrowed from Metal Gear Solid 4. People who are used to playing Call of Duty or other sorts of games would be totally out of their element playing a game like Metal Gear Online 2. But something happened when it came out, and when it kept getting updated, it created some sort of fervor, and I don't have the actual numbers for this, but there were a lot of people playing this game, and a lot of people who were really dedicated. People who were creating clans, clan tags. There were people who participated in the survival mode and the tournament mode, which helped grow this massive, energetic community. And then something happened. I'm not sure exactly when this started, but you could almost feel a switch being flicked. There were reports of all these glitches happening throughout the game that were different from the regular old people teleporting and whatnot glitches that were a problem with the game's coding itself. No, these glitches were user-generated. All sorts of things like death looping, lag switching, and other things like that to just ruin the experience for all the other players. Not to mention that Metal Gear Online 2 had a competitive mode built into it. So there was survival and tournament mode where players got exclusive prizes in-game for participating and doing really well in these different arenas. But of course, those who can't cheat. So you had these lag switchers and death loopers and all sorts of other cheaters coming into these game modes, basically ruining the experience for everyone else just to get their hands on these exclusive prizes that they didn't want to fight for. The Wikipedia page for this game extensively documents what happened with these cheating incidents. Now, I don't think it was ever explained why exactly Metal Gear Online 2 was shut down, but I'm pretty sure this was one of the prevalent issues. You had all these hackers and cheaters and exploiters going into the game, ruining the experience for everyone in a way that Konami clearly couldn't keep up with. And not to mention that, but the servers were also being attacked by these distributed denial of service attacks. So ultimately, Konami just pulled the plug, and Metal Gear Online 2 was lost to history. So I think maybe that's the first issue, is that you had all these frustrated players who had a game that they really enjoyed, a community that they were very fervently a part of, waiting for the next big thing. And then with Metal Gear Solid 5 coming out, you knew that Metal Gear Online 3 was going to be a thing, and we had these hopes and expectations that it was going to be just as big, if not better than Metal Gear Online 2 was. After Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain and Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes was announced, Konami opened up Kojima Productions Los Angeles, or KPLA, which was supposed to help with the online portion of it. It has a quote from the Konami Digital Entertainment president Tomoyuki Tsuboi. The Los Angeles studio emphasizes Konami and Kojima Productions' commitment to expanding our digital footprint. The new studio will put Kojima Productions in the heart of the West, which will benefit future releases as it will introduce new talent and creativity to the development teams. That was announced in 2013, almost exactly 2 years before Metal Gear Solid 5 would be released. I don't think for an entirely new studio coming together that 2 years is enough to do an online game. I know that Call of Duty used to do its iterations in 2 years, but it just doesn't seem like enough to me, especially given all the time that Metal Gear Solid 5 took to develop. It really seems like at the tail end they just decided to put this online thing together. So then, Metal Gear Solid 5 is released in September 2015, but before that it was announced that Metal Gear Online would be delayed another month. Now I find that almost laughable thinking about it now, that the game actually had to be delayed considering how little content and polish it actually published with. Leading up to Metal Gear Solid 5's release, there were all these rumors and speculation about the relationship between Kojima and Konami, how it had become strained, how Konami was ditching Kojima, how he would be leaving and Metal Gear Solid 5 would then be definitively his last Metal Gear game. All that stuff sadly turned out to be true, and the production of Metal Gear Solid 5 suffered so much as a result of it. I almost feel like Kojima did this as sort of a middle finger to Konami. When Metal Gear Solid 5 released, it released alongside a collector's edition, which I got, which had an extra special episode 51 on it. This episode 51 was named Kingdom of the Flies, and it was supposed to have some extra story content to it. I didn't know what the hell that was supposed to be before it came out, and I don't think a lot of other people did, but when you watch the episode and the content on that, it actually details an unfinished chapter that was supposed to be in Metal Gear Solid 5, but wasn't included because they ran out of development time.
I will kill you!
That's right. Don't blame yourself. Blame me.
In the end, it's a really sad story, especially for a series I like so much to have been given this sort of treatment, that fans will never know what it would be like to play through that last chapter. Fans will never know what it will be like to have this final game complete and finished. And then there's Metal Gear Online 3, a game that was given 2 years of development time as far as I can tell, amid all this controversy surrounding Metal Gear Solid 5, and it didn't fare well. And now I want to be really delicate with what I say about Metal Gear Online 3 because I don't want to offend the people at Kojima Productions LA who I think worked really hard to make something work when they weren't given the proper tools to do the job. I remember the launch of Metal Gear Online 3 being horrible. You had a bunch of people ready and waiting to start getting their hands on the game on the day that it was supposed to be out. But you had to go to the PlayStation Store and download this completely separate update file. And the update file wasn't on the PlayStation Store in various regions. So you had to keep going back online, waiting, updating, and then if you went to the link to the PlayStation Store from the game, it would take you to a completely dead site that didn't even have the update file. But by the next day, I think everyone was pretty much able to play. So then you come into this game that feels very starkly different from Metal Gear Online 2. For one, there's no combat knife. They completely took that away, which makes sense because there was no combat knife in Metal Gear Solid 5 anyway. There's also no chat in Metal Gear Online 3, and while at first I thought maybe this was just an oversight, they never patched it in afterwards either. But you have this call-out system and this really shitty preset text system that they added in later in an update. the character customization seemed pretty alright, and I was really looking forward to all the new kinds of equipment that you can unlock, just like in Metal Gear Online 2. They introduced this new rock, paper, scissors style system with the enforcers, infiltrators, and scouts, making up your tank, sneaker, person, and sniper classes, basically. At first, I think I really liked the class system. I think it was a good attempt to kind of add some variety to the game. Unfortunately, now I realize that it just sort of divides up the content in a way that's not fun or rewarding. Not to mention, it introduces a whole bunch of balance issues that still haven't been addressed, and they try to tweak things to make things better, but it ends up being where I'm never playing the character that I want to be playing. So that's one of the major differences. I really feel like, honestly, they should have not done the class system. They should have just done away with it, and if they were going to let people personalize their character, why not just let them personalize their character the way they want to without the restrictions of class? I end up having two different classes with basically all the same equipment, but one is slightly faster than the other, and one just has one piece of equipment that the other can't get. The class system in Metal Gear Online 3 also leads to these really frustrating instances in which, because of the character you're playing as, you're stuck in between a rock and a hard place. So if you're playing in team sneaking and all your teammates get killed and you're the last one left with
1 minute remaining,
like this guy, what do you do if you're not playing as a fast character? Not to mention the maps are super huge, so if you're playing as a scout who has a sniper rifle on his back, it's gonna take way longer than a minute to run and get the disc and come back and upload it so that your team can actually win. At least in Metal Gear Online 2, the maps were made in such a way that there were shortcuts everywhere, not to mention that the character's base speed was always good enough to make a comeback if you were paying attention. I realize now what this is. This is their attempt to ape Battlefield. In fact, this whole online game is trying to ape Battlefield a lot. Ascension is the worst fucking thing ever. It's completely pointless. You don't really unlock anything special for it, and it feels like an arbitrary force system put into the game just to add another level of progression where none needed to be there. That's not even to mention the new level up system, which is completely different from Metal Gear Online 2. Instead of the Metal Gear Online 2 system, which I admittedly didn't like that much, where you level up and down depending on how well you did, and none of the weapons or gear is unlocked based on your level, it's just unlocked through gear points. Now you have this new system where you have to level up, and everything just feels so arbitrarily placed in this level tree. And in Metal Gear Online 3, especially coming from Metal Gear Online 2, which had everything unlocked right from the get-go, it just feels like such an unrewarding system. Why do I have to be at level 27 to unlock grenades? Why isn't there some kind of shortcut system where if I have enough gear points, I can just buy equipment that I would have to otherwise wait to unlock at later levels? Why is the reward for ascending and going past the level cap just a fucking piece of clothing that you can't even customize with other pieces of clothing? It's just an empty, vapid, arbitrary system that didn't need to be in this game, just like the class system. Metal Gear Online 3 just has a class system and it has a level up system for no fucking reason, and it detracts from the game instead of making it better and worthwhile. The amount of time it takes to level up alone is enough to make someone not want to play the game, especially since some characters are so unprepared and unequipped to battle against other characters just because they're on a low level. In a game about sneaking where stealth matters above all else, you don't unlock a silencer for your fucking tranquilizer gun until you get to a higher level. And that in turn creates this weird system where it's harder to level up because your character sucks until you get to a higher level where you have better equipment, thus making it easier to level up, because now you can be more effective in battle. Not to mention, you don't get unlocks for specific guns by using the gun like in other games. You have to just level up to an arbitrary level so you can get that piece of equipment. Now this is in stark contrast to the Drebin point system of Metal Gear Online 2. In Metal Gear Online 2, you didn't need to unlock any weapons yourself. Instead, you would play in the game mode that you wanted, Team Deathmatch, Stealth Deathmatch, Regular Deathmatch, and then you would unlock the weapon that you wanted just by using Drebin points within the match. So you didn't have to create your own loadouts or anything like that. In a sense, I feel like that was far more balanced of a system because you had to do well in order to unlock the better equipment. So that means a lot of people were just using the basic equipment because they weren't doing well enough to get all the hard stuff. And if they were, then they earned it. Metal Gear Online 3 has a pretty good point system, so it's weird that they didn't include the Drebin point system. Instead, they have this 3-class system that really just ends up messing up the game. And because they had to make each class feel different, you now have a loadout system where you can change your loadout. So then you have all these different weapons that people really don't have to earn within the match that they play. Sleep gas grenades, silenced sniper rifles, and all sorts of other stuff. And because it's part of your loadout, no weapons can be banned like they were able to be in Metal Gear Online 2. In Metal Gear Online 2, the community really picked up eventually that some weapons just weren't fit for certain game modes. So there was a system where you can ban certain weapons from certain games. But in Metal Gear Online 3, you now have this loadout system, and because it's your own personally crafted loadout, they can't just ban your weapons, otherwise you might be completely useless. So now any weapon is allowed in any mode, and it really just creates this sort of chaotic experience in all of the game modes, especially since they're allowed right off the bat without the character having to spend Drebin points or anything else to earn those weapons within the match. They have sort of a built-in restriction system with the weight system in this game. Each piece of equipment that you put in your loadout takes a bit of weight. It weighs down on your character and makes them slower. I think they could have done a whole lot with this, but the infiltrators already have a naturally faster running speed than something like an enforcer, no matter what equipment that they're wearing, and I just am wondering why. If you're going to have the weight system, why also have an extra restriction on the base stats of the classes? Why not just do away with the classes and have a higher weight for more powerful equipment, like a really heavy-duty sniper rifle or a large machine gun? I just don't see why they felt the class system was necessary. It was an alright addition at first, but now I just feel like it takes so much of the soul out of this game even more. Hideo Kojima has always had this really big interest in Western culture. It's one of the reasons why Metal Gear exists at all. And I think he's done an amazing job in immersing his games in that setting and capturing that aesthetic. So it's no surprise that Metal Gear Solid 5 itself is very much trying to be like the Western open world games that came before it. For proof of this, you need look no further than Hideo Kojima's own tweets about Grand Theft Auto 5, how when the Grand Theft Auto 5 gameplay was revealed, he felt depressed because he knew he couldn't make the Phantom Pain as good as that, or at least he thought so. And then there's the article about the Kojima Productions Los Angeles studio opening up. The new studio will put Kojima Productions in the heart of the West, which will benefit future releases as it will introduce new talent and creativity to the development teams. Hideo Kojima really wanted to make an open world game that was like the Western open world games like Grand Theft Auto, Battlefield, and Fallout. And I think Metal Gear Solid 5 benefited a lot from this sort of mixing of cultures. But then you have Metal Gear Online, who's stuck between trying to be Metal Gear and trying to be this Western multiplayer game, and it didn't come out very well as a result. Metal Gear Online 3 is trying very hard to be Battlefield Lite, particularly Battlefield 4, I think. Some of the major similarities are the class system that they introduced into Metal Gear Online 3. Now, instead of having the Metal Gear Online 2 system where differences in characters were dictated by what skills you used and the skill level of the player himself, they added this class system where you have an enforcer, infiltrator, and a sniper basically. Now the skills, gear, and weapons of these characters is dictated by whatever class they're in. This is so similar to the Battlefield 4 class system. There are actually 4 classes in Battlefield. I thought there were 3, but I went and installed the game again and checked. There are 4. You've got basically your medic, who's really good at healing your teammates, your engineer, who's good at repairing and taking out large machines. You have the support class, which is useful for giving teammates ammo. I actually don't really know too much about this class. Then you have the recon class, which is your sniper class. And one of the biggest flaws about this 3-class system that they brought haphazardly to Metal Gear Online 3 is that each character has different stats. You don't see that kind of shit in Battlefield 4 or Call of Duty or even Metal Gear Online 2. In Metal Gear Online 2, if I'm playing as Snake, Vamp, or Raiden, those guys are just as easy to kill as a regular soldier if I know what I'm doing. Sure, in Metal Gear Online 3, you might be able to judge what class a player is playing as by telling what clothes they're wearing, but that's not always possible, 1. 2, sometimes those characters are wearing stealth camo, and 3, that's already asking the player to do way too much. How is it fair if I get the drop on someone and they just don't die because they happen to have a higher amount of health? It's just another poorly thought out system that takes away from the game rather than add something fun and special to it. And then there's this huge focus on team-based gameplay. Now, Metal Gear Online 2 had a lot of team-based gameplay, which is why they had SOP and all this other stuff, which made it easier to help your teammates out. But Metal Gear Online 3 had this almost obsession with team-based gameplay to the point that there are no solo modes. There's no deathmatch, there's no stealth deathmatch. You can't play by yourself, you have to be part of a team. And when you join a match, it automatically matches you with a buddy, which I'll talk about a little later. I don't think there are any solo modes in Battlefield 4, I might be wrong about that, but there's definitely a huge emphasis on squad-based gameplay. You can spawn on your squad member, you can call out to your squad member, you can mark enemies for your squad members to see. You're supposed to ride in vehicles together and participate in these large-scale battles with your teammates in order to take out the enemy. Conquest isn't something that someone can do solo. So with these team-based game modes, you have a team-based system, which is the buddy system in Metal Gear Online 3, which is definitely, most certainly, trying to be like the squad system in this game. The marking system and the call-out system looks almost identical to how it does in Battlefield 4, which is also how it is in Metal Gear Solid 5 proper, to be fair. So they added this buddy system where you're randomly matched with a person on your team. The more time you spend close to them, the faster your buddy gauge goes up. If you have a full buddy gauge, you can use a wormhole to warp to wherever their position is. But how did they really expect this to fucking work? I mean, you're supposed to spend a lot of time with them, but then also when you spend a lot of time with them, you get an ability to teleport to where they are, but if you're spending a lot of time with them, why would you be separated in the first place? Also, the fact that you just get matched with a random person. So you just get matched with some fucking rando on your team, and if you have an odd number of teammates, then you don't get matched with anyone, because fuck you, right? It's a system where I don't care who my buddy is or what they're doing at any given time. I'd rather just go it solo. Now, this gets rid of the SOP system that they had in Metal Gear Online 2. You could opt in and out of SOP, which could be used as a strategy. Sure, you can see all your teammates through the map and you get the location of your teammates when they're in trouble, but if someone scans you, then all your teammates are screwed. So a player had to make the distinct choice of whether to put his teammates at risk by linking into SOP for the benefit of knowing where they are at all times, or to stay in the dark and not link into SOP so that everyone is safe in case someone gets compromised. In Metal Gear Online 3, they took that out completely. You now are always aware of all your teammates on the map at any time, and if you get scanned, you're screwed from the get-go because there's nothing you can do to defend against it. You can't choose not to activate the linking in system in order to keep everyone safe. No, you're always linked in all the time. But then they went and downgraded that system as well. Not only can't you use it strategically, but now it doesn't even tell you where your teammates are on the map. Sure, if you look through a wall, you can see where they are, but if one of my teammates has just been killed, unlike in Metal Gear Online 2, when you got a real-time icon that showed you the location of your teammate, in this game, there's nothing, so I have to just turn my camera around frantically, trying to look for a little blue dot through a wall to see where my teammate is, if they're in trouble, or if they've just been killed. The only time the game shows you where your teammate is if they're in danger is if they're your buddy who is randomly selected. So you have them trying to ape the Battlefield 4 squad system, and in the process of doing that, completely ruining one of the things that made Metal Gear Online 2 so fun to begin with, the SOP system, which added an extra layer of team-based thought and strategy.
Oh damn, they got a shotgun 3 down here. Oh! Nigga, use the shotgun. Oh! Damn.
As you should know if you play Battlefield, Battlefield has this big emphasis on large-scale warfare. Battlefield 4 is this big, expansive thing. The maps are gigantic, they're huge. And you have all these different methods of getting around them. You have boats, you have planes, you have cars, you have tanks, you have helicopters. But for players who don't really like that super gigantic large-scale warfare, Battlefield 4 also allows for smaller maps for game modes like Team Deathmatch, or they even have a difference between large-scale conquest and small-scale conquest. So in the smaller game modes, you would just play in a little cordoned off section of the map rather than the gigantic large-scale map that you normally have access to. These games also have dynamic weather, of course. In Metal Gear Online 3, the maps are really large, but then they also have variants, rush maps, which are smaller versions of it. You play on a small little cordoned off section of it rather than the whole large map. These maps in Metal Gear Online 3 also have little vehicles and emplacements on them. You have the Walker Gears, you have the anti-tank gun emplacements, you have these mounted gun emplacements, and you have mortars. So you have a combination of really large maps and these weapon emplacements and vehicles that players can utilize in an online battle. Not to mention the addition of small cordoned off versions of the maps where you only play on a little section of it rather than the full size. This is honestly one of the worst things about it. Ignoring the fact, first of all, that a lot of these weapon emplacements are completely unbalanced for a Metal Gear Online type game.
Enemies revealed.
You have maps that are just either way too big and forcing players to spend so much of their time either sprinting from one place to another or walking slowly if they run out of stamina, or just looking around trying to find out where all the action is happening. Or the maps are way too small, creating these chaotic messes of matches where you can't even tell what the hell is going on because you've got characters with 10 grenades and a small section of the map to play on, and it's just explosions after explosions, people running at these top speeds with the sprinting animations, and none of it is carefully balanced or polished in a way that makes it feel good or fun to play. I'm going to talk about this more later, but the one really good map in Metal Gear Online 3, I think, is Amber Station, because it has that old Metal Gear Online 2 feel of maze-like maps where there are a lot of overlapping areas and multiple ways in which you can get around the map. And it's no coincidence that this is the only map with one specific size. It doesn't have a large or small variant. So you have a system in which they were trying to ape Battlefield to be Battlefield Lite, with these really big maps with smaller variants and game modes that are very team-based. But then you also have a game that's supposed to be stealth-focused. It's supposed to be a Metal Gear game. Not to mention that you even have maps that are so big that you have a giant invisible force field surrounding them to keep players from going off into the distance. Gee, what game does that remind me of?
Hey, soldier, where are you going? Вражескую машину вижу!
All this stuff really adds up to make it feel like we didn't get a Metal Gear Online 3. We got, again, Battlefield Lite, Metal Gear Battlefield. It's not the controlled, quirky but fun, stiff but tense level and gameplay and map design that we got from Metal Gear Online 2. It's something else entirely. And it almost makes me wonder who's really to blame here. Is it Kojima for trying to push this really big Western focus? Is it Konami, who had these really intense deadlines and demands that weren't able to be met? Or is it Kojima Productions LA, who was this Western team that maybe didn't really know why people liked Metal Gear Online 2 so much? So whoever's fault it was, whatever the reason was for this, Metal Gear Online 3 tried to be Battlefield Lite, and it just ended up making it, one, not the game that people wanted to play, and two, not a good game. One of the more disappointing aspects of the game was that there were only 3 game modes when the game first launched. And me being the optimistic little piece of shit that I was, I thought, hey, they're going to add new game modes as the game goes along, as they did with Metal Gear Online 2. In Metal Gear Online 2, that game first launched and had a bunch of game modes: Team Deathmatch, Team Sneaking, Deathmatch, and all sorts of other stuff, especially Sneaking Mission, which was a really unique take on Team Deathmatch. They weren't all team-based modes, and then, as the game kept evolving, they kept adding new game modes that were even better than the old ones somehow. Stealth Deathmatch was one of the most unique and fun spins on Deathmatch I'd ever played. It's just so tense and gratifying when you manage to sneak up on an enemy and take them out, even though you have no idea where they are. So I thought with Metal Gear Online 3 we would see new modes start taking shape, but no. After a few updates and the DLCs launched, they only released 1 new game mode, adding to a grand total of 4 game modes. So the 3 game modes you had at the start are Bounty Hunter, Cloak and Dagger, and Comm Control. Bounty Hunter is your basic team deathmatch mode, Cloak and Dagger is your take on team sneaking, and Comm Control is basically a base mission. And they all suck. I would say that the best mode in the game is Bounty Hunter, just because it really feels like they took their time out to think of a mode that would work really well with Metal Gear Solid 5's mechanic. It's a spin on Team Deathmatch that I haven't seen in any other game, where you're rewarded for knocking people out and capturing them instead of killing them. And doing that can turn the entire game around in ways that you can't always predict. It adds a really fun and strategic layer to this otherwise tired game mode of Team Deathmatch. But I think with all the different issues I said about the gear and the weapons and how they unlock, this game mode can get chaotic really fast, to a point where you feel like you have no control over what's going on, and it all just seems to be kind of exploding in your face, quite literally. There just doesn't seem to be enough limitation on the gear that you can use. If I have a sniper with just the skill tactical level 1 equipped, then that character can now hold up to 5 hand grenades. If I just equip tactical level 2, I can now equip a hand grenade and a stun grenade. So that's 5 hand grenades and 3 stun grenades. That's just a spam fest. No one needs that many grenades. Imagine in Call of Duty or even fucking Battlefield if you had someone running around with 8 grenades that they could just throw at any time. You know, if I swapped out that stun grenade for a petrol bomb, which is basically as strong as a regular grenade, then I could have 10 grenades at my disposal at any given time. That's not to mention that I can then equip a shotgun if I'm an infiltrator, a sniper rifle if I'm a scout, or a grenade launcher if I'm an enforcer. So you have this basically unrestricted system where people are getting all these different overpowered pieces of equipment and extensive amounts of ammo for each one, and it just becomes a spam fest. Now what I thought was a cool little thing about Bounty Hunter is that you can't use the Fulton indoors. So that was kind of a little neat trick that you can do if your team is losing or winning and you really don't want to get Fulton. If you're a really high value target and you have like 20 or so kills on your belt, you could just run indoors so that no one can Fulton you. But in an update, they added the ability to use a wormhole to Fulton people, which I think was actually a really cool twist, except that I feel like it happens far too frequently for something that's supposed to be a game changer. If any time you have a really high value target, now you can just wormhole them. So if you got someone with, say, 30 kills, instead of putting them strapped to the balloons, which can get shot out of the air, you can just use your wormhole and there's nothing the other team can do about that. Which would be fine as like a 1 or 2 per match kind of thing, but I get wormholed all the fucking time when I play these 99 stock team deathmatch modes. And considering they're not updating this game anymore, I don't think the amount which that wormhole fills is going to ever change. And that brings me to Cloak and Dagger, a mode that really is supposed to be the epitome of team-based strategy. And they managed to fuck that up. So not just to mention all the issues with the linking in system and the buddy system that I just mentioned, there are also so many issues with this game mode that's kind of an iconic game mode of Metal Gear. It's something that can only really work with Metal Gear's mechanics. You have two teams that each have different equipment. One team is equipped with stealth and tranquilizing equipment. The other team is equipped with the heavy duty stuff to take people down. Right off the bat, the game mode on its most fundamental level, the invisible team versus the visible team, is broken. Because they added the fucking infiltrator class, which can use stealth camo too, even if they're on the defending team.
Use caution.
The basic core principle of the mode is that one team is weaker, but they have stealth, and the other team is stronger, but they don't have stealth. And it's completely ruined by the fact that infiltrators on the defending team can have stealth too. There's supposed to be a disparity between lethal and non-lethal equipment. The invisible team has only non-lethal equipment, and the visible team has only lethal equipment. But that's actually not true, because the visible team can also use non-lethal equipment. You can put a tranquilizer gun on your assault rifle, and it works exactly the same, except it's pretty slow. But hey, if you want to put an attacking member to sleep, you can, because this game and its loadout system. Not to mention, one of the main core principles of the mode is now overridden by the fact that the defending team can now use stealth camo just like the attacking team can. But in this game, they added this precious loadout system and the class system, and they had to allow you to use your precious equipment. So, here's stealth camo, buddies. Here's a tranquilizer gun. Use them as you will. But that's not even the real big issue with this game mode. Part of the real biggest issue with Cloak and Dagger are the mechanical things. So, the game is really fast, and there's a lot of sprint grabbing where someone's running at their top speed and then they grab you right away. I'm going to get into mechanical stuff more later on, but just keep those two things in mind. What I will mention now, though, is a mechanical choice in Metal Gear Online 3 that is just another one of the most mind-boggling things I can think of. On the attacking team, the team that has the stealth and has to steal the targets, no matter what, you were always visible to some degree. In Metal Gear Online 2, in Team Sneaking, if you had stealth on, you were completely invisible. The only thing that were visible were your gun and your knife. In Metal Gear Online 3, your entire body is always visible. It creates this frustrating system to where even if you're playing as smart as you possibly can be playing, you can always be seen. You can be hiding in the grass or hiding in the shadow and crawling and playing slow and playing carefully and still get a headshot from across the map by some guy who happened to see your outline. It also creates this frustrating thing where the moment you spawn, you're visible and someone who's good enough can start shooting you. Now usually the map design kind of covers this up, but on some maps like Grey Rampart, you can literally get shot once you fucking spawn.
Retrieve an enemy data disk.
I'm going to talk more about the maps later, but one of the issues with this whole stealth thing, your outline always being somewhat visible, is really prevalent when you think about, again, something that's just mind-boggling, and how did they not catch this? When you have stealth on, you are actually easier to see when there's some sort of weather effect happening on the map. So let's say there's a sandstorm, or fog, or even rain. It's easier to see someone who's wearing stealth. I don't know the exact reason for this, but if you're looking at someone who has stealth on in the middle of a sandstorm, their outline sort of peeks through the layer of the weather effect. They're always on top of the weather effect no matter what. So you can just see that outline in the middle of a sandstorm, which is supposed to obscure your vision, and then it makes them easier to aim at and easier to kill. I have no idea why they made the stealth system work like this. They should have made it so that, first of all, the defending team can't fucking use stealth during Cloak and Dagger. There have been so many times where I'm on the defending team and I can't tell who's an enemy and who's one of my teammates because they both have stealth on. But beyond that, they should have made it so that the attacking team's stealth is a superior brand of stealth somehow. I understand that this game has larger maps and whatnot, so maybe making the attacking team somewhat visible all the time was their way of mitigating that. But it doesn't work, and it didn't work, and the fact that you can see people easier through weather effects is clear and obvious proof that it doesn't work. What they should have done was made it so that you're more visible the faster you're moving or the higher up you're standing, so that the only way you can be completely invisible is if you're on the ground, in the shadow, and as low as possible. Not to mention the fact that they added a combat knife in a later update. So they could have just had it so that your combat knife and small arms are always visible. And maybe when you're aiming a weapon, no matter what the weapon is, that weapon also becomes visible. But that your actual body is invisible unless you're sprinting or jumping or some other high energy movement. There shouldn't be a situation where I'm crawling on the ground and waiting in the shadow and I haven't made any noise in my location, and yet someone who just happens to be running by shoots me in the head because they just know that I'm there. They can see my entire body, my entire outline. There shouldn't be a situation in which I'm running through a sandstorm and I get shot in the head because I can be seen a lot easier in the sandstorm than in other weather effects. And the most frustrating thing about this is that there was already a built-in solution. In Metal Gear Solid 5, they have full stealth mode, where if you're crawling on the ground and you hold down triangle, just like in Metal Gear Online 2, you can reach your absolute lowest point. Your body has basically become one with the ground. Maybe if you do that, you should be completely invisible. You can't aim in that mode, you can't shoot anybody, and you can't move. There are also somewhat minor issues, like the fact that the upload sound for the data disk is really low. So if I know that the data disk has been stolen, I can't tell that it's being uploaded. But then the whole game mode itself really doesn't make sense in Metal Gear Online 3. This is the game mode I was looking most forward to when Metal Gear Online 3 was announced. And it's the one I feel like that has received the worst treatment. It was not thought out, it was not carefully balanced and tested. It was just a jumble of mistakes and missed opportunities that added up to a lackluster and not fun game mode. Now the other two game modes are Comp Control and Sabotage, with Sabotage being added in alongside the DLC as an update. I have played those two game modes, but not extensively, and I really only wanted to talk about Bounty Hunter and Cloak and Dagger. These two game modes are sort of made for Metal Gear. They're sort of very specifically what the Metal Gear experience should be. And while Bounty Hunter managed to do something cool and unique, it sort of fell short on a lot of different aspects. It's all too chaotic. And Cloak and Dagger was just something that feels like it was never meant to be. It was just short-sighted, not very well tested, not very well planned. And that's it! There are only 4 game modes in this game. Are you kidding me? How did it go from having 11 game modes in Metal Gear Online 2 to having 4 in this game? Not to mention that one of them had to be added in after the fact. It's really a damn shame and just goes to show how little this game really has to offer. I've been trying to spend a lot of time thinking about why I don't like the maps in this game. And at first, when the game came out, I actually thought the maps were pretty decent, but now I get that there's something very significantly different from these maps and the maps in Metal Gear Online 2. Now, I think there are two main reasons for this change. The maps in Metal Gear Online 3 are so much more sprawling and wide. There are not a lot of places to hide or take cover. They're so flat, everything's so open. You can see from across the map in a lot of instances. There are a few maps like that in Metal Gear Online 2. You have Midtown Maelstrom, sort of Icebound Inferno, and Virtuous Vista. These are maps that are very large, very wide, have a lot of open space, and very little cover to hide in. But somehow, even they managed to execute this idea better than they did in Metal Gear Online 3. And I think the main two reasons for the maps being the way they are in Metal Gear Online 3 is the Fulton system and the fact that you can sprint. The movement is so much faster in Metal Gear Online 3 that you have to be able to make these maps that can accommodate it, right? And then you have the Fulton system, this balloon recovery system, so you need open air to be able to use it. Again, they didn't add the wormholes until later, so you can't have a map that's entirely underground or entirely indoors, because then you wouldn't be able to use one of the core mechanics of the game. So some of my favorite maps in Metal Gear Online 2, like Tomb of Tubes, Hazard House, things like that, aren't really viable in this game. And that's a damn shame. There are a lot of different kinds of maps, and I'm about to throw out some jargon that may not mean anything, but it's stuff I just made up. You have what I like to call the 1-2-1 map, which is basically a map with a large central avenue and two smaller avenues along the sides of it. Even something like Midtown Maelstrom would fit into that, or Ambush Alley. These maps tend to have a lot more open space because a lot of the fighting happens in that central avenue, but then there's also a lot of ways to sneak around. Then you have an arena sort of map, like Bloodbath, where it's just a huge square and a lot of open space in the center, so this big all-out brawl can take place in this middle area. Then you have a third kind of map, which I like to think of like a maze. This is something like your Hazard House or your Tomb of Tubes, where it's a lot of interwoven, overlapping layers, where you can get from one place to another in multiple different ways, and it creates this sort of web of avenues and entry points and choke points, where there's a lot of different areas you can get around your enemy and really catch them off guard. And then the last kind of map is like your Virtuous Vista, where it's kind of a big air, open, wide space. A lot of the maps in Metal Gear Online 3 take after Virtuous Vista. It's just a lot of open space. And the reason they did this, again, is not only for the Fulton and sprinting, but also because snipers need to be viable in this game too, because there's a whole class based off of them. It's another way in which the class system might have ruined this game, because you can only have a very specific kind of map to accommodate them. When you play Bounty Hunter, a lot of the battles tend to happen in very specific, concentrated areas, and that's where all the action is. And when that's not happening, the game mode is just boring, because the maps are so big, you spend so much time trying to find people to fight. In Cloak and Dagger, there are usually a set amount of entry points and very specific hiding spots. The opening move is almost always the same, because you can always expect that players will go to specific places. I see what they were doing. They were trying to go for this aesthetic in Cloak and Dagger, where you have a team of stealth-equipped soldiers approaching a base that's looming into view over a hill, and they have to overcome these odds in order to infiltrate this base and escape from it. So with Cloak and Dagger, the spawn points are made in such a way that the infiltrating team is outside of the base and they have to sneak into it. Never mind the fact that Rush completely ruins this aesthetic, so why even include it in the first place? And two, just because the maps are made to look a certain way doesn't mean that they play that way, and doesn't mean that they play that way very well, because of the mechanics and the rules of the game mode. I feel like it would have been so much more fun if they just stuck to the maze-based maps or the arena-based maps, rather than trying to create this feel of infiltrating this great difficult base. When I looked at the map for Black Site, which was the map used in Ground Zeroes, I took a look at the original and I saw that they actually put a lot of work into getting rid of a lot of the dead ends and adding new areas and avenues to get around. The same goes for Rust Palace, which is a map taken out of Afghanistan in Metal Gear Solid 5, where they added a bunch of ladders and stuff like that to get around the building a lot easier. But they lack that maze-like structure of Groznygrad. They lack that 1-2-1 feeling of Ambush Alley, where there's always an avenue we can see straight across. They lack that arena feeling of Bloodbath. No, instead they're all sort of the same map, a really flat surface that spans a really long distance, in a way in which you can see all the way across the map from just one vantage point. But there is one map that I think was brilliantly done, and that's Amber Station. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this map is the only one with one defined size. There's no rush mode for this map. Its normal size is the default size for every game mode. With this map, you really see the interwoven, overlocking, web-like maze structure of something like Hazard House or Groznygrad in Metal Gear Online 2. You have so many ways to get around, so many shortcuts from one place to another, and while it's not perfect, it's the best map in the game by far. So I went around Metal Gear Solid 5, and I went around to different locations throughout the games, and picked some areas that I thought would make really good maps for Metal Gear Online 3. They have the open air areas, but they also have a lot of the sort of internal web-like areas that are maze-like, like in Metal Gear Online 2. The first one I think would be a good one to look at is Mother Base. Now this is the default command area of Mother Base. You've got a lot of stairs, a lot of ladders, a lot of tubes, ways you can get higher and lower, a lot of interwoven, overlapping areas. Now, I honestly think this map would probably be a little too big for Metal Gear Online, so maybe they could cut off a lot of the higher up areas, like the 4th floor and beyond. But even if you just keep the ground level, the 1st floor, and the 2nd floor, I think that's more than enough to have a really good map. You have the open space for Fultoning, but you also have a lot of different maze-like ways you can get around this area. From just one point of the map, you can't see across, but it still has a lot of opportunities for snipers if they can get up to the higher levels and look down upon those who are trying to sneak around below. The next area I looked at was Nova Braga Airport in Africa. Now this is sort of like an inverted 1-2-1 map. You have 2 avenues on the side and a building in the middle, which can also be a combat zone. So in order to get from one side to another, you have to go through the airport building, but there are different and varying ways you can jump across. The indoors area is small and short-lived, but it has a lot of different distractions you can use to hide yourself and take cover during a firefight. And there's a high point on the map where snipers can get up and look down upon both sides, but they can't look upon both sides at once. It creates sort of a pick and choosing game where they have to choose what side to pay attention to, not to mention that people who want to sneak by would be completely invisible to these snipers if they were inside the building. This next area I really like, and I think it would definitely be a haven for snipers. It's Kungenga Mine. This map is one big pit, which means it gets lower elevation as you go toward the center. For this map, I think I would also use some of the buildings on the outskirts as extra little places to hide. Firefights would happen all across the mine, but also in the little areas that are to the sides. This map is more arena-based, like Bloodbath. Snipers would definitely be a key asset to get people who are far away on the other side. But then there are little avenues here and there where people would be able to sneak, not to mention the buildings that they can hide inside of. For this map, I would just use the main area of the mine and not extend into the other areas. This map would be the epitome of a maze-like map. It's basically a mansion grounds with a ton of indoor and outdoor areas you can look through. With a few short climbs up stairs, ladders, and walls, you can easily get to the top level and look down upon those beneath you. You can also jump over barriers to get to lower levels. The indoors area has a lot of corners, a lot of hiding spots, a lot of choke points where people can get caught if they're not paying attention. For this bottom area of the indoors place, I think I would get rid of this huge ass tree that's blocking the view. But other than that, I think I would keep everything pretty much the same. You have all these different fences you can use to jump down to the swimming pool area below, and even climb back up the ladder to get up there. Not to mention, there's a shortcut on the bottom level that you can use to get from one side of the map to the other. For this map, I would use the indoors of the mansion and some of the outdoors areas as well, just to create a little bit of solid footing outside the mansion. This is all just masturbation, right? None of these maps exist in Metal Gear Online 3. Even if they did exist, I wouldn't want them to be exactly the same, and I would want the mechanics to be different, like changing how stealth works and changing how sprinting works. But in the end, I'm just frustrated that some of my favorite maps like Winter Warehouse, Ambush Alley, Hazard House, they don't exist in Metal Gear Online 3 because of this focus on Battlefield-like wide open maps.
Of course, these kind of games have a certain lifetime. They last for a certain point and then they get replaced by others. What kind of lifetime does Konami expect from this game? I know you can't give me like precise figures, but like in terms of a year, 2 years, or like several years, multiple years, even a decade, who knows?
Well, I mean, that kind of thing is really hard to predict. It's entirely up to the player base. We hope that players will like it for a long time and enjoy it just because it's a really fun experience. You know, every online game, this goes for other franchises as well, when they introduce a series and then maybe they iterate on it or they'll support it, they hope that players will be playing from the day they start to their next content point to their next content point. And we just hope that players will just enjoy this game for as long as they can. And we're not going to pick any specific year or date. We're just going to helpfully support them on the way through their experience, and I hope that they enjoy it. And if there are any parts that they're having trouble with, of course, we'll be listening to their feedback so we can hopefully make this game as good as it can be for the entire time that they want to play it.
You know, over the course of making this really long, really intensive video, I've been getting really demoralized. It's not just the fact that Metal Gear Online 3 wasn't the game that I wanted it to be, but it's the fact that the people who are playing it don't care, and now PlayStation has decided to put it up on the PlayStation Store for free, so the player base is flooded over with all this new fresh meat that's ready to play this magnificent online game that doesn't exist. I'm titling this video The Death of MGO3, and I can't really call it The Death of MGO3 if new people are starting to flood in and play this game and make it live again, right? Wrong. This guy I have zero respect for. I'm sorry, I know you're a community manager and your job is to basically make shitty things sound great, but this game has not been well supported and you shouldn't have even pretended that it has been. The official Metal Gear Online Twitter account hasn't tweeted since April, and they haven't tweeted directly about updating the game since July 21st, 2016. People might be playing it, but the game's not being supported. If that's not dead, I don't know what is. And I swear I didn't plan for this, but apparently the game was having server issues. I tried to sign in on October 5th, 2017 at 11:30 a.m. and I kept getting this error message saying that I couldn't connect to the servers. Now eventually, after a really long wait, I was able to get into a game with active players, but even after that the servers were still laggy. I wasn't able to check my characters or equipment without there being excessive loading times because of the server issue. But then I left the game and turned on Rocket League and was able to get into a match within a matter of seconds. I played through the full match too, I even won, scored a goal. And the experience was just so much more fun. There's a whole lot more that I wanted to say, but now that I'm sort of at my wit's end with this whole experience, I think it would be best to just compare the numbers. Nothing shows more how much Metal Gear Online 3, the next big thing, is lacking than the raw, honest-to-goodness numbers of the whole experience. In Metal Gear Online 3, the final tally is 3 unique characters, 4 game modes, 8 skills, 9 maps, 32 callouts, and 50 pieces of equipment, not including the colors. In Metal Gear Online 2, you have 19 skills, not including the EX or the lethal weapons, which are all separate. 11 game modes, not including interval. 7 unique characters, not including Otacon, which you could use during sneaking mission if you had a lot of players. 15 maps, 87 callouts plus a full text chat system, and 112 pieces of equipment, not including the colors or the various face paints which you could apply to your character after creating them. If that doesn't spell out how much Metal Gear Online 3 is lacking in the content department, then I don't know what will. But it doesn't even end there, because Konami, in its infinite greed, decided to put microtransactions into Metal Gear Online 3, further dividing the little amount of content it had to begin with. You look at the initial Metal Gear Online 3 trailer that they showed, the reveal trailer that made everyone super excited for this game, and they show pieces of equipment in that A, weren't even accessible from the beginning. For some reason, they were rolled out on like a weekly or bi-weekly basis. It was really weird. There was no announcement leading up to it. They just randomly decided to release certain pieces of equipment later on arbitrary days. But then, some of that equipment had to be bought with microtransaction, mother base coins, which you have to pay for like all microtransaction currencies. So for people who don't want to pay real money and instead want to use the fucking gear point system that they already have built into the game mode, you have this split in the economy. Some equipment you can only get with mother base coins, not to mention if you buy a piece of equipment with mother base coins, every single color variant then has to also be bought with mother base coins for some fuck all reason. What's the point of even having gear points if you're going to completely cordon off sections of the content? Let me be absolutely clear. It is impossible to buy these pieces of equipment with regular gear points that you can earn from just playing the game. You have to use the microtransactions and mother base coins in order to buy these pieces of equipment and the color variants. That's also not to mention that Metal Gear Online 3 doesn't separate upper body and lower body equipment, so there's less customizability in general. But then, that's not even the kicker, my friends. The kicker is there are actually 3 different currencies that you can use to play this game, all of which have content that you can only get with that specific currency. You have some pieces of clothing and colors that you can only get with gear points, some pieces of clothing and colors that you can only get with mother base coins, and then, in order to get further money out of you with a gimmick, they released these appeal actions, which are basically these silly little animations you can give to your character to make them dance around and do funny stuff. But guess what? You can't even buy these appeal actions with mother base coins. No, you have to go to the PlayStation Store and buy it from the PlayStation Store using your PlayStation Store credits, which means you have to pay real money for a completely separate currency in order to buy these appeal actions. When the DLC released, I criticized it initially because it had 2 out of 3 maps that were basically copy-pasted from the main game. Yeah, they touched them up a little bit, added a little things here and there, and honestly, Azure Mountain is the worst map in this entire game. It's just a fucking nipple in the middle of a field. There's no strategy to it, there's no sense to it, it's just a bunch of people in a fucking open field trying to shoot each other. It's fucking mind-boggling. But then you have this DLC character, Quiet, only one. Every single expansion pack in Metal Gear Online 2 had at least 2 unique characters added in. So the Cloaked in Silence DLC was $4 for 3 maps and the ability to play as the character Quiet. They sold these appeal packs, which again were just animations. They're basically just like taunts. They sold them in 4 separate packs for $2 each. Buy all 4 packs and you've just paid twice as much as you would have paid for the DLC. Number 1, why weren't these appeal packs just included in the DLC in the first place? And number 2, how do you devalue your own DLC by putting it alongside these stupid animation packs that cost more altogether? Way to say, we don't have much to offer, but buy our shit anyway. So, lackluster content, lack of content, 3 different currencies for the game mode, and you've got a perfect storm for just this cash cow of a thing that wasn't even able to stand on its own 2 feet to begin with. And now it's free on PSN for a month, and I can only imagine all these new players are gonna flock in and start paying money blindly for these microtransactions and stuff. And it's kinda sickening. And it's one of the main reasons why I hate when people say, oh, it's only cosmetic, it doesn't matter. If you took away the gear in Metal Gear Online 2, sure, Metal Gear Online 2 is fun, but part of that fun was getting to buy this new gear with reward points and customize my character. Imagine taking out the clothing in Soul Calibur 5 or even Metal Gear Online 3. What else is there if you take out the cosmetics? It's part of the fun of the game. It doesn't matter if it's only cosmetic. It doesn't matter if it doesn't affect gameplay. It does affect my experience. And if you take that out, if you put it behind a paywall, that hampers my experience in many ways. This really doesn't mean anything, but just to put it into numbers in a way that I think is more digestible. If you added together all the numbers I just listed out for each game, it would be 106 for Metal Gear Online 3 and 251 for Metal Gear Online 2. That means that Metal Gear Online 3 has 42% of the content that Metal Gear Online 2 does. And that's not even accounting for the split content due to microtransactions and real-world currency. Again, you can't really add together numbers like that and make it mean something, but I just think that sort of visualizes it in a way that I couldn't do with simple words. Metal Gear Online 3 is 42% of the game that Metal Gear Online 2 was. Damn. There's so much more I could have said and so much more I would have said, but this video's gone on for too long. I'm sick of talking, and I'm sure you guys are sick of listening to me. I came across as really mean in this video, and I didn't want to. I think the reason I did is because I'm just so angry. I wanted this game to be so much, and it just wasn't. And then you have just random things that I've been dealing with over the course of my experience with this game, like how CQC is utterly fucking broken. I don't know how much of this is due to lag. I couldn't possibly measure it, but CQC in this game just doesn't work. You have people teleporting out of grabs, people fucking grabbing you even though you grabbed them first, you diving out of the way but somehow you teleport into their grab as if they grabbed you in midair. I'm sure if you've just been watching my footage all this time, you would have seen so many instances of CQC that just don't make any sense. You're trying to ape Battlefield, but where are the dedicated servers that Battlefield has? But if you don't give a game dedicated servers, then you have issues like this, where I can seemingly never get a green ping in this game. I can get green pings in many of other games, including Metal Gear Online 2. But for some reason in this game, my ping just isn't ever stable. Neither is anyone else's. Look at this shit. Oops, I wasn't paying attention and forgot to select my loadout again, which means I only have a combat knife to get through this entire round. Okay, here's the next test. I want you to look at this clip and tell me what happened. I don't know what happened to me. I was being shot at by one guy but being hit from another direction, and then something blew up and then I died. That happens far too often. It's the chaos of a Call of Duty game without the fun of it. But I'm not gonna pretend I've never had fun with this game. In fact, I've had fun with it a lot, and it's part of the reason I've kept playing. When you get into a certain lobby with a certain group of people, this game can be unimaginably fun and exciting and tense, and you really feel like you're enjoying the experience. Suddenly you're in the zone, you're having one of your best matches ever, you're sneaking around everyone, you're killing all these people, you're really contributing to your team, you're the #1 player on their team, everyone's like, yeah, you go get him, you're the reason your team is winning. And then, right when you think you've had a good time, the host leaves, the room gets disconnected, and that's the game. Oh, by the way, all the experience points you would have gotten for, you know, all of those kills and moves that you did, you don't get those because the match ended early. Not that that was your fault, but, you know, what can we do? This is essentially what it feels like to play Metal Gear Online 3. It's got the controls and graphics and presentation of a mechanically superior game, but then it's trying to play copycat all the time, and it comes up short. I was going to have a whole other section called MGO3 Operation Overhaul or something like that, where I detailed patch 1.1, where they basically tried to make the game feel as much like Metal Gear Online 2 as possible. They added the ability to use a combat knife, they added tweaks to the UI and the ability to mess around after the match ended, and they added the ability to press a button in order to tap awake your ally instead of just kicking them awake like you used to be able to do. But I'll suffice it to say that they realized that their community wasn't happy, that the game wasn't the Metal Gear Online 2 successor that they wanted. So the developers of Metal Gear Online 3 just had this last-ditch effort to make the game seem as much like Metal Gear Online 2 as possible. Honestly, in the end, it did make the game more fun, but it all seemed so haphazardly introduced and without balance or real playtesting. And then there's all the glitches that happen with this game that I'm just going to show in montage format because I've done this all in the past before.
My soul, flowers of our brighter past, they bloomed so free beneath the sun. Memories I want to
And then there's the fact that there aren't simple callouts like telling the team to stick together, telling the team to use a wormhole. There's no callouts like that. Simple fucking shit. Part of my whole conspiracy theory was that the development studio didn't have the resources they needed to hire voice actors again. And that was kind of proof that they didn't have the resources to push out a really good game. And my evidence for this was that they had all these callouts and then they released a DLC and it had no new callouts. Instead, they had this stupid preset chat system. Not to mention, as kind of a cynical thing, they released Quiet, who doesn't require new voice acting because she just hums. Spoiler alert, Quiet does speak in Metal Gear Solid 5, so they could have given her callouts. They just chose not to because she's Quiet. Of course she doesn't have callouts. Then there's the fact that the game doesn't have any sort of tutorial whatsoever. It doesn't teach you how to play, it doesn't teach you how to get used to the new game modes. And the game only allows you to get to know the layout of one map without being in a battle. You notice how the game always starts on this Jade Forest map and your character's just sitting down and you get to run around it afterwards? Yeah, you know, I thought it would be cool if you could change the map that you load into so that if I wanted to learn the layout of Blacksite or Azure Mountain or Coral Complex, then I could. That's why a lot of times in this video when I was talking about the maps or its layout, I was just using footage from inside matches because there's no way to just explore a map without being under gunfire. Then there's the fact that I'll never know what it's like to play as Eli or the Man on Fire or the third child in Metal Gear Online 3. All these obvious candidates for unique characters who got shafted because the game wasn't complete. Then there's the fact that I'll never know what it's like to experience a snowy map or a snowstorm or something like that in Metal Gear Online 3. But all of that doesn't even begin to compare to the biggest fuck you that came just months after the game came out. Metal Gear Uncle Fucking Survive. Pair that with the news that Konami closed down the Kojima Productions Los Angeles studio, and that settles it. Metal Gear Online 3 is dead. It's no longer being supported. Konami never cared about it. Konami only wanted to release it to get a few extra bucks before moving on to their next thing. And I feel so sorry for the Kojima Productions LA studio who had to work under these conditions and push out a subpar product that they weren't given the proper resources to support. People gave me some shit when I released my Metal Gear Survive trailer reaction video, but I think I explained it quite well in that video and I'm gonna explain it again. The real reason I am so unfathomably livid when I think about Metal Gear Survive is not just because of the stain it puts on a legacy, a series that I've loved so dearly. It's because we were promised an online game and an experience that would continue to be supported throughout its lifetime. But Konami turned around and pushed out Metal Gear Survive with the same resources that should have gone to Metal Gear Online 3. This was supposed to be an experience that would be memorable and joyful, and it turned into this hobbled cash cow of a game that was just being used as a stand-in until they released their next product, and we got shafted. But in the end, I guess it's not all bad. Metal Gear Online 2 is available. If you have a PlayStation 3, you can play it. And apparently, if you have a PlayStation 2, you can play Metal Gear Online 1 as well. These genius fucking hacker nerds are the greatest people in the world. They managed to bring back the online game that got me into online games, and I love them so much for that. And I'm going to continue trying to support this community as much as I can, as long as this game is alive. This isn't nostalgia speaking. In this video, I've been using footage of me actually playing through Metal Gear Online 2 for hours and hours, and I've just been having such a blast with it. Sure, the community is toxic sometimes. We still have the same people fighting over who's a better character, who's not, who's a higher level, who's not, and it gets old really fast. But I'm just so happy to be playing the game again that I don't even care. I can customize my character again. I can customize my callouts again. I can enjoy these timeless game modes like Stealth Deathmatch, Team Sneaking, and Rescue Mission the way they were meant to be played. And in the end, I'm having so much more fun enjoying Metal Gear Online 2, which was a game that was given the time, given the resources, and given the care that it needed. And in the end, we have a game with character, with fun, with joy, and with Easter eggs.
Liquid! Are you an otaku too?